everyone, it's Miriam with a Y. Let's paint some alcohol ink flowers, and let's do it in a mostly monochromatic way. I love white on black, so just for fun, let's make all of our flowers white. So we'll need some white alcohol ink. Marabu's white is hands down the best for this, and I'll explain more about that later on. And we'll need a black substrate. For that, I recommend Grafix Opaque Black Craft Plastic. Price-wise, it's the best for the benefits that it offers, including heat resistance and also being able to use colored pencils or any pencils really on it as well. For these flowers, we'll just be using small paintbrushes and some optional paint pens, if you like. No airbrush will be needed for these flowers. And we'll need a palette of some sort. Now, ordinarily, I recommend using these small little silicone cups to hold your ink if you thin it with alcohol, because these are nice and stable, and because they have a smaller opening than like a palette well would, your ink and alcohol mix will evaporate much slower. But for some reason, every single time I try to make this type of painting with white that I've put into one of these guys, I don't know why this is, it never dries as silky smooth on my black. I mean, like, it'll dry and all that, but it doesn't have that really even, smooth, organza-like look that I really like. It kind of looks it's pretty, but it's just not as smooth and even. I don't know why. I've tried at least 6 or 7 times, and every single time it's been the same. I don't know if it's a reaction to the silicone. I don't know if it's because there is a narrow opening. I can't explain it, but just trust me on this one. The palette is the way to go, just for this type of painting. I'm starting out by adding a couple of drops of white ink to my palette and then adding several drops of isopropyl alcohol to it to thin it. I use either 91% or 99%, whichever I grab first, honestly. 99% gives a somewhat smoother look on bigger areas, but these are going to be really small flowers, and 91% evaporates slower. So it really depends on your priorities which one you use if you have both on hand. I use a thin paintbrush to dot on drops to start the conical shape of one of the Veronica or Speedwell-like flowers. I try not to let the drops overlap until the first drops have totally dried. So in the meantime, I can start little blooms for another style of flower. And for that, I'm just making W-like shapes that I'll connect later with green stems and leaves and stuff. Now, periodically, I'll also add more dots to my Veronica in the background at the top of the painting. Now, I'm starting to put down some petals for coneflowers. Again, I don't let the individual petals touch so that they don't turn into like one big white blob. I want each petal to completely dry with its own individual bright white border. You know how alcohol ink likes to dry with borders? I want those borders to be really obvious. Now, here is the beauty of the Marabu ink and why I'm choosing Marabu for this. In general, Marabu inks are more resistant to reactivation with alcohol or more ink than other alcohol ink brands. And their white is particularly that way, which is awesome for this. Because now watch what we can do because of this aspect of the ink. We can paint a petal over a previous fully dry one. It's got to be dry. And you can see through the new petal and see the old one underneath. It's so cool. I love this X-ray like effect. No other white ink can do this because painting the new petal would immediately reactivate and dissolve the border of the petal underneath. Now, ordinarily, when we're using alcohol inks, we want inks to reactivate that way and dissolve previous layers. But the fact that this Marabu ink resists that new layer gives us a new technique that we can add to our alcohol ink arsenal. It always makes me sad when I see someone comment or post in my group that they don't like an entire brand of alcohol inks because such and such brand doesn't behave just the same way as another brand of ink. I think that thinking that way misses the point of having different inks available. If all brands were the same, that would be so limiting, you guys. Yes, different ink brands have different characteristics. Learn those characteristics and use them to your artistic advantage. That way you've got more things that you can do. Okay, that's my little advice semi-lecture for the day. Okay, with my petals in place, I could start dotting in the cone at the head of the cone flowers and begin another sprig of Speedwell or Veronica. Remember, the trick to having this work is to let layers dry before layering anything on top. Also, try to be gentle with your new brush strokes, like when you're adding a new petal on top of an old one. The ones underneath are resistant to being reactivated, but they aren't impervious to it. So like if you kept manipulating the brush back and forth, you could eventually dissolve the petal underneath. So the mantra to have in your head while you're doing this is build your layers patiently and gently, patiently and gently. And then this will work out just great. When you paint something like this, it may be a good idea to have a bit of a layout in mind of where your flowers are going to go. Or you can wing it like I'm doing. I think an argument can be made for either way of doing it. Now me, I'm just painting flower heads here and there with space in between so that later on I can fill in some greenery. You are limited only by your imagination when you paint something like this. Seriously, make up flowers. Overlap some petal shapes and bingo, you've got a flower, honest. It's amazing how our brains automatically see blobs with a green stem underneath as flowers, or a grouping of blobs with a green stem underneath. Because chances are there are flowers like that somewhere on the planet. And if not, who's really going to know? So don't stress yourself out with realism. Embrace the abstract. Make some blobs, put some green lines underneath, you'll have flowers. And if you end up not liking something, use a little alcohol on a cotton swab or tissue and wipe it away, and then put in something that you do like. This plastic is endlessly reusable. See, like this bloom bothered me because it was too bright white compared to everything else. This can happen as your ink starts to evaporate. So every now and then I'll add a couple of drops of alcohol to my white to thin it again. Personally, I really like having the super translucent look of some petals like this. So I add a couple extra drops of alcohol now and then. But if you prefer your petals to be brighter white, just add another drop of ink to your palette. But try to vary the translucency of your petals a little bit, just for interest, and also a better sense of depth to your flowers. You don't want them to be all flat one color, or one shade, I guess, maybe in this case. Now, I'm painting a variety of shapes to give you some ideas, but there's no reason your entire painting can't be all one style of flower either. Practice making flowers you like, and then go to town painting a garden or a bouquet. I'm pretty happy with this number of flowers and the variety, so let's move on to some greenery and maybe some other finishing details. For a mixed media flair and also the incredible ease of use, I'm going to use Posca paint pens for this. I'm using Posca color light green, but there are a couple of other greens in their line that you might like. They even have a glitter green. It's not super glittery, but it's kind of a little sparkly. I'm using this pen to draw in very simple stems to connect tiny blooms, to make individual sprigs, and also to ground each bloom so it isn't just like floating in space. I also want very thin lines for everything, which is another reason I'm using the Posca pens. Once all the stems are in, I start adding leaves. For the most part, I'm not going to color the leaves in. Now that's a design choice on my part. I want them to look sketched or doodled on so that the blooms are what's dominant in the painting. Now you might think differently and you might prefer thicker stems and leaves that have more color. There's no right way to do this. Just make whatever makes you happy. Just make sure that whatever you use is opaque so that it can show up on the black. So for example, if you tried alcohol markers, for example, that wouldn't show up against the black because those markers are transparent. You can add some green ink to your white alcohol ink, and with a very fine paintbrush, paint in your stems and your leaves. The white ink would make the green ink opaque and make it very visible against black. Or you could use opaque acrylic paint, for example. That would work too. So you've got options. For a little added flair, I'm using a gold Posca pen now and adding some little details to the blooms before finishing up with a little extra greenery. In the comments, let me know what flowers you would paint and if you like the addition of the gold. As always, links for everything I used are in the description box below the video. For monthly exclusive videos, more direct access to me when you need it, templates, downloadable images, and more, consider becoming a patron of this channel by going to patreon.com/MiriamsNature. I hope you enjoyed watching this little garden come together. Let me know with a thumbs up and tell me in the comments what else you'd like to see. Okay, go let your creative nature shine. Thank you for watching. See you soon. Bye now.